The fall of Saigon. On April 30th, 1975, as Saigon fell, desperate people tried to board helicopters from rooftops. The US evacuation was chaotic, with thousands left behind. This photo became the symbol of America's exit from Vietnam. Berlin Wall. In 1989, after nearly 30 years of division, East Germans flooded the streets and began tearing down the Berlin Wall. The moment marked the end of the Cold War and the beginning of a reunified Germany. Tiananmen Square Tank Man. In 1989, after student-led protests in Beijing, this lone man stood in front of a line of tanks. Nobody knows his name or what happened to him, but this image became a global symbol of courage and resistance. Soviet flag over Reichstag. In May 1945, Soviet soldiers raised their flag over Berlin, signaling the defeat of Hitler's regime. The photo became one of the most iconic images of World War II, symbolizing victory after years of bloodshed. Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Over 2,000 Americans died that morning, and the US entered World War II the very next day. Hiroshima Shadows. When the atomic bomb exploded over Hiroshima in 1945, the heat was so intense it burned human shadows into stone. These outlines are all that remain of people who vanished in an instant. Afghan Girl. In 1984, photographer Steve McCurry captured this young Afghan refugee in Pakistan. Her piercing green eyes made the cover of National Geographic and became one of the most famous portraits ever taken. Hindenburg Disaster. In 1937, the German airship Hindenburg caught fire while landing in New Jersey. 36 people were killed, and the disaster ended the era of passenger airships. Winston Churchill V for Victory. During World War II, Winston Churchill's V for Victory salute inspired millions of Britons. It became a symbol of defiance against Nazi Germany. Che Guevara dead. In 1967, Che Guevara was captured and executed in Bolivia. This photo of his body was meant to prove his death, but instead, it made him a global icon. John Lennon and Yoko Ono begging for peace. In 1969, John Lennon and Yoko Ono staged a bid-in for peace. They invited the press to their hotel room, using love and music to protest the Vietnam War. Fidel Castro and Malcolm X meeting. In 1960, Cuban leader Fidel Castro met US activist Malcolm X in Harlem, New York. The photo captured two controversial figures standing together at a turning point in history. Hitler in Paris. In 1940, after conquering France, Adolf Hitler visited Paris. He posed at the Eiffel Tower, a chilling image of Nazi dominance at its height. Wright brothers' first flight. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright achieved the first powered flight in North Carolina. Their fragile plane flew just 12 seconds, but it changed the future of travel forever. First nuclear submarine at North Pole. In 1958, the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine, traveled under the Arctic ice and surfaced at the North Pole. It was a Cold War show of technological power. First photograph of Earth from space. In 1946, a camera mounted on a V-2 rocket captured the first photo of Earth from space. It gave humanity a new perspective, our planet, fragile and small. First X-ray image. In 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen created the first X-ray image, his wife's hand, showing her bones and wedding ring. It revolutionized medicine overnight. Polio vaccine trials. In 1954, millions of children took part in the first mistrial of the polio vaccine. The disease had paralyzed thousands every year, but the vaccine changed everything. Woodstock Festival crowd. In 1969, over 400,000 people gathered at Woodstock in New York. The festival became the symbol of peace, love, and the counterculture revolution. Muhammad Ali vs. Sonny Liston. In 1965, Muhammad Ali knocked out Sonny Liston in the first round. This iconic photo of Ali standing over his opponent became the most famous image in boxing history. Marilyn Monroe in white dress. In 1954, Marilyn Monroe stood over a subway grate in New York while filming The 7-Year Itch. The wind lifted her dress, creating a photo that became instantly legendary. Titanic survivors. On April 15, 1912, the Titanic sank after hitting an iceberg. Over 1,500 people died, but this photo shows survivors being rescued from lifeboats by the Carpathia. Chernobyl firefighters. In 1986, when reactor number 4 exploded in Chernobyl, firefighters arrived without protective gear. They tried to contain the flames, but many died within weeks from radiation exposure. 9/11's attacks. On September 11, 2001, hijacked planes struck New York's Twin Towers. Nearly 3,000 people were killed, and the attacks reshaped global history and security. Dust Bowl migrants. In the 1930s, severe droughts and dust storms devastated farms across the US. Thousands of families packed up everything they owned, searching for work and survival in California. Aberfan disaster. In 1966, a coal waste tip collapsed onto a school in Aberfan, Wales. 116 children and 28 adults were killed instantly. Challenger explosion. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart just 73 seconds after liftoff. All 7 astronauts on board were killed, including teacher Krista McAuliffe. Indian partition refugees. When India and Pakistan were divided in 1947, over 14 million people were forced to leave their homes. Violence erupted, and hundreds of thousands died during the journey. Great Depression breadlines. During the 1930s, the US faced its worst economic collapse. Unemployed and starving, thousands stood in breadlines just to survive each day. Hurricane Katrina aftermath. When Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans in 2005, levees failed and entire neighborhoods were flooded. Thousands were stranded on rooftops and without aid for days. Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. stood before 250,000 people in Washington, D.C. His I Have a Dream speech became one of the most powerful calls for civil rights in history. First day of desegregation. In the 1960s, Ruby Bridges became one of the first black children to attend an all-white school in the US. She was just 6 years old, facing protests and hatred every day. Nelson Mandela released. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison in South Africa. His freedom marked the beginning of the end for apartheid. The Beatles' rooftop concert. In 1969, the Beatles surprised London by performing on a rooftop. It was their last public concert before the band broke up just a year later. Albert Einstein sticking out tongue. In 1951, after his birthday celebration, Albert Einstein got tired of posing for serious photos. So when a photographer aimed at him, he stuck out his tongue, creating an image that became iconic. Migrant mother. In 1936, photographer Dorothea Lange captured this woman in California. Her worried eyes and hungry children became the most famous image of the Great Depression. Women's suffrage march. In the early 1900s, women in the US and Europe marched in the streets demanding the right to vote. They faced arrests, ridicule, and violence, but they changed history. 9-year-old music. In the 1910s, photographer Lewis Hine documented child labor in America. Kids as young as 9 worked long hours selling newspapers, in factories, and in mines. Apollo 11 moon landing. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, saying his famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Over 600 million people watched the moment live. Earthrise from Apollo 8. In 1968, the Apollo 8 crew captured Earth rising above the moon's horizon. It was the first time humanity saw our planet as a fragile blue sphere in space. D-Day landings. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. Thousands died that day. But the invasion opened the road to liberating Europe from Hitler's rule. Guernica after bombing. In 1937, German bombers destroyed the Spanish town of Guernica during the Civil War. Hundreds of civilians were killed, and Picasso later immortalized the tragedy in his famous painting, Atomic Bomb Test. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb was detonated in New Mexico. Witnesses described the explosion as brighter than the sun. It was the test that led directly to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Korean War orphan. During the Korean War, millions of children were left orphaned. This photo of a young boy walking with an American soldier became a haunting reminder of what's toll on the innocent. World War Christmas truce. On Christmas Eve 1914, German and British soldiers left their trenches. They exchanged gifts, sang carols, and even played football together. By morning, the war continued, but this moment proved humanity could shine through. San Francisco earthquake. In 1906, San Francisco was struck by one of the strongest earthquakes in US history. Buildings collapsed, fires raged for days, and over 3,000 people were killed. Hindenburg victims being carried. When the Hindenburg crashed in New Jersey, dozens were killed instantly. This photo of victims being carried away shocked the world and ended passenger airship travel for good. Bhopal gas tragedy. In 1984, a gas leak at a pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, poisoned 500,000 people. Thousands died overnight, and the effects are still felt today. Mount St. Helens eruption. In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington state. The blast flattened forests, destroyed towns, and killed 57 people. Bangladesh cyclone. In 1970, a massive cyclone struck Bangladesh, killing over 300,000 people. It remains one of the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded.